Well, today we are here with Dan Winter. Dan Winter is quite an extraordinary human. And, I kind of like to think of Dan myself as like the most beautiful Merlin grandpa teddy bear that you've ever met in your life. And I had the blessing and the opportunity to go spend some time with Dan last summer out in South France, and it was an amazing experience, and we bonded in a deep way. And I feel really excited to have him here to talk about what's going on in the world today, because there's so much happening right here, and it's really important that we have guidance from coherent elders at this time. And Dan has got a tremendous amount of valuable information and wisdom in regards to humanity, and especially in regards to the physics of everything that is happening on the energetic level as far as humans, auras, and even earth changes. And so today we're just going to talk a little bit about all of the craziness that's going on, and we're going to tune into some of this wisdom that Dan has to help us navigate through these times. So Dan, how's it going? How you doing?
Oh, thank you. I guess I could be the grandpa teddy bear. It's a little gray here, but Patrick, you had some of the most intelligent questions, and you're one of the more intelligent interviewers I've ever worked with. I'm happy to chat with you, and you're right. We need to share some visions here. So I'm rare, and I'm happy to do this.
So let me just ask you off the top is, what do you feel is most relevant right now for humans to be tuning into, spending their time doing, and putting their energy into?
Well, the concept of what is immune health and how to develop the charge in your aura, which is called immune health or heart rate variability, and why that is not just the issue for viruses, but also whether your aura is plasma projective, whether you can lucid dream, and the state of our response to the challenge of AI and extraterrestrials and the extraterrestrial context and challenges. It does all kind of get back to having a healthy immune system that can produce an aura that's plasma projective or shamanic or blissful. So that's a major subject here. It's important. It's Kundalini, all that stuff.
So how specifically does densifying and expanding your aura help us in the, as far as our relationship to the AI threat, as you mentioned?
Well, the conventional medicine is clear. If your heart harmonics are inclusive or fractal, you have an immune system. But conventional medicine doesn't know that translates into a big aura, or how to measure that aura, GDV, for example, or that having that aura is not just whether you have bliss and can lucid dream and resist viruses and have immune health and take memory through death. It's basically survival, critical, essential. But that ultimately is the differentiating issue between many cultures around the galaxy that we know about, who are challenged by the AI issue and AI problem. Not that artificial intelligence is always an anathema to biological ensoulment, but the priority in a culture dominated by machines is different than a priority in a culture dominated by biology. So knowing the difference between plasma, life force that's generated by biology and becomes projective and powerful and shamanic and steers tornadoes, versus people talking only about quantum computing and plasma that's generated by machines, and our machines are going to get more intelligent, isn't that wonderful? Well, yes, but maybe that's not the number one priority. And so defining that difference in terms of survival and the long-term meaning of being human and having a soul, and doing that scientifically, that's what we're about here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've thought often about the reductionist metaphor that people use in regards to comparing human consciousness to technology or even computers, and how, on many levels there is a correlation, and you can map it that way and see that it makes sense to a certain degree. But it's so reductionist in the sense where, as I ponder on the idea of, you hear people like Ray Kurzweil talk about creating like synthetic kidneys or whatnot, or like, all the synthetic hearts, and what that would actually, what effect that would actually have metaphysically on the human. So like, what are actually the higher dimensional properties of organs? And if we replace it with some sort of machinery, what is going to be the result of that? You know, I mean, like, what is our heart doing on a higher dimensional level that a machine won't? And if we replace it to try to live 2,000 years, you know, what kind of negative effects are we going to experience?
Yeah, as you were talking, I'm thinking of the Darth Vader problem, you know. So,
Right.
you know, we woke up one day and we've discovered Dad was half machine, and that's both Luke Skywalker and that's Muad'Dib of Dune. It's the same issue. What does it mean when Dad is half machine? Well, and what does it mean? We find that our Draco Anunnaki ancestors were half machine, and yes, and how does a scientist talk about that? The right question. Briefly. There's something called dielectric constant, which is the ability of a material to implode charge negentropically. And the nature of biology itself, the physics of biologic architecture, for example, is that when you use biologic materials, you're more likely to implode capacitance, which then becomes negentropic, self-organizing, and eventually mindful. So there's some ancient myth, actually Jason was telling me about yesterday, that, you know, the ancient king at one point had his arm replaced with a metal artifice. And then they said, well, you can no longer be king when you have something artificial in your body because you know, you are no longer the Grail force. And well, what that really means is that the ability of your aura to be fractal or implosive or symmetrical is critical. So classical example, your child has been experimenting with recreational drugs and you don't like it. And rather than say, bad news, you're going to get holes in your aura, instead you get out a GDV and you measure and you show them the holes in their aura. Well, and when you have porosity in your aura, you're susceptible to parasites, including viruses, obviously. So the symmetry of the aura is always going to be served best if there's all biologic material. Now, there's a whole range of that. For example, you know, metal implants, titanium is better than steel. It's because it's more, the dielectric is better, et cetera. So there's a whole range of materials here. So it isn't that having implants is sinful, but it is true that it gets harder and harder to have truly implosive aura the more synthetics you inhabit, which is actually the same thing is true of your house. So when you pick a place to have a Therapy or healing plasma or to do healing rituals, if you have a biologic architecture, you have a better chance at being implosive. And so this needs to be turned into the understanding of the physics of what it is that makes your aura implosive and plasma projective, and therefore shamanic, literally Jedi, which means to plasma project. So yeah, we can talk about that using physics. And yes, ultimately it does get back to the question of, you know, is our civilization dedicated to making the best machine possible or the best biology possible? And ultimately, we need to understand what is that difference.
Yeah,
and I get excited recently when we're getting clear feedback with the Therify.net plasma system that we are triggering lucid dreaming ability. It's very good. It's the second latest Therify blog there, Therify.net. Myra from Paris and Athens. Dramatic triggering of lucid dreaming and telepathy. And the thing is, it's not a mystery. We know exactly why, because you conjugate and implode these massive plasma pine cones, and it's very centripetal around the body's aura. And that engages by conjugation down that pine cone to the Planck threshold, the compression of the projection of the toothpaste out the tube of the longitudinal EMF coherence, literally the Egyptian Ba from the Ka. And that longitudinal EMF coherence is what they call the Kesjan body in the Gurdjieff term, which is the lucid dreaming body. And it fits all the Aboriginal stories too. And we know that where magnetic lines cross, you embed this longitudinal EMF, and that's exactly where you can do labyrinths and cathedrals and lucid dreaming. So we're understanding the physics. And that then leads us to part of your other question, which was when these rather, I would say, arrogant and how would you say, possessive, the Pleiadians are telling us, well, we're 5D and you guys are only 3D and you guys better be humble. But yet they don't say a damn thing about what they mean by being 5D. So here, scientists, now that we understand exactly what is meant by that, it means your aura is coherent enough, implosive enough, that is spin dense enough to project that longitudinal coherent wave. And that specifically happens when the spin symmetries in your aura have more harmonics in them, which literally shows up as the fifth dimension, the fifth superposed harmonic. And by the way, any harmonic over 3 in the cascading series has to be ratio golden mean, or it will be destructive wave interference. So the fifth dimension is literally not just the next superposed axis of rotating spin of charge, but it shows up in the power spectra of both EEG and EKG. Sorry about that. And so that results in spin density, and that results in an implosive aura. And that coherence is the ability to have that coherent lucid dreaming body. And that's exactly what the Anunnaki meant when they said, well, we arrived on Earth and we started aging catastrophically because the electrical atmosphere was such that we couldn't be negentropic. Well, now we know what that means. And now in the Pleiadians, it's actually Med, who's, I think, more informed than this Gosha of Cosmic Agency, who claims to be talking to Pleiadians, but I don't trust her, actually. It's a long story, but I don't think her physics is together. But Med, who originally put her in touch with the Pleiadians, is very clear those decaying nuclear generators in the moon that was used to be called the frequency fence, but she actually defines what frequencies were used by those frequency generators and mentions 50 hertz specifically, which we now know is the frequency that allows the implosive cascade, 50 hertz being the most often mentioned frequency in cancer healing in all the medical literature, and 50 hertz exactly golden ratio exponent of Planck, and the critical frequency to make carbon grow. 60 hertz doesn't cut it. So when she said that those resonators in the moon that were preventing charge implosion on the Earth, and thus preventing the stargates from working and keeping the Dracos stranded here for a long time, the so-called quarantine, and now the frequency generators are messing up, they're old, and suddenly more humans have to deal with an implosive environment, meaning, you know, eventually they call that the rapture, but it actually means quite literally, more humans will be able to lucid dream. The thing is, for those whose aura cannot withstand additional compression, people who have too much anger and not enough sorted emotions, they will go nuts faster. The process of getting ready for that is quite clear. It's the same way you prepare for death or bliss or birth. You get all your memories into a shareable mode. And that is to say, you don't need secrets because everything you're thinking serves everyone. Pure compressibility, shareable wave.
Right. And I think a lot of people can feel this happening too. I know that myself, it feels as if the energy is raising in so many different ways that all that is out of alignment, or say as you would say, like non-shareable, is being forced. I'm being forced to look at it, right? Yes. Because it's almost in the way that I, you know, before I heard that this was the context of the moon and all of these different say causal factors for creating this kind of shift was happening, I would notice that when I got a new higher energy level, or if I would have a Kundalini experience, like, you know, at night when I was laying down or in the morning when I was waking up, that I'd have a breakthrough and my frequency would go up and I would feel my aura get more dense, but then whatever fault line that I had in my psychic awareness would kind of be flushed right to the surface. And if that energy wasn't stabilized, it would turn into anxiety or frustration or fear even.
Exactly.
And so what advice do you give to people that are, say, having more Kundalini experiences during this time for stabilizing this energy and not letting it kind of puppet them through their psychic fault line distortions?
That's obviously the right question. I'm sure there's no simple answers, but I am reminded there's this famous guy, I should mention his name, who was teaching lucid dreaming. And one of the things he was saying was that if you didn't learn how to meditate, you don't learn how to anchor a still point enough to steer and navigate in the lucid dream. Very profound insight there, because we know what successful meditation is. It's this golden ratio cascade, which enables your aura to remain centripetal so the tornado doesn't get pushed around. I mean, it's very simple. You don't want to be pushed around. And,
right.
And so what's happening, of course, is that your charge collapse is more and more enabled in your aura. And that will gain inertia, become more and more centripetal. And that will increase spin density, exactly like the ice skater pulling in her arms when she's spinning. She speeds up. Well, that increased spin density is by definition, awareness, because spin density and information density are the same thing, and it's charges, same thing. So that's why Kundalini, for example, is measurable in the microwave in the quantum distance between ADP and ATP adenosine triphosphate, because it's literally metabolic density. That's what it is. And mechanically, what that engenders is that the long wave breath and HRV, heart low frequency coherence, which engages the spine liquid pump, sacrocranial. Remember, it is clinically impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. And that is the beginning of the wave mechanics of what aroused at the crown of the head during Kundalini, that fiery pumped wave of bliss. And I have 30 years of this, so I'm pretty intimate with this story. And that's exactly right. I will say that for me, well, about 30 years ago at Crystal Hill Farm in Eden, New York, I first started having intense Kundalini. I was living on the farm and I was driving into work, and I will remember as the sun rose almost every day, I basically cried for almost a month, actually. And if you had asked me at the time why I was crying, I don't think I could even have told you. And if you asked me whether it was tears of pain or tears of bliss, I don't think I could have answered that question either. What actually was emerging, that my memories were being sorted into the spin dense, and obviously what remains after destructive interference removes everything else. What remains is only beauty, actually, pure fractality, the shareable wave. Shelley named her website theshareablewave.com, which I love, and it's literally coherence optimized and perfected, which means every single thought is about something that's pure principle and therefore shareable, and therefore the wave can propagate and you can withstand compression, which means then ultimately you'll steer bigger and bigger tornadoes. And you're right, it's psychic fault lines. It's about finding every bit of anger that in fact didn't represent the perspective of all concerned. So as you analyze any situation that you think you might be angry about, and you examine more and more the perspective of the other parties, suddenly it's like the peacock feathers, and you wake up with consumed perspective and you see everyone's point of view. And that's literally the fractal implosion. And that's what you assume when you become the powerful shaman.
That's so beautiful. And I relate so much to this experience in my own life as far as making peace with my past, or sorting my, in a sense that's sorting my aura. But this process of, I sometimes I describe when I'm working with different clients that, they'll say like, how do you know if you're over something like a trauma? And, for me, how I answer that question is that I know that I'm over some sort of traumatic experience or some sort of resentment when whatever memory that I have about that arises nothing but gratitude and appreciation.
Exactly. And in the post-traumatic stress therapy and addiction therapy, that in psychological terms of behavior mod, was that if you're the schizophrenia that results from a traumatic experience is the fact that during the moment of peak pain, you disconnected from the pain and therefore the memory. And so the moment that you can absolutely relax and replay that vision with no stress at all, suddenly it's gone. And so it's similar to relaxation therapy, learning to breathe through it, et cetera, which means feeling every bit of the pain. And pain was only the fractality that was broken and bleeding charge. And when compression is restored, and it's called non-destructive collapse in both physics and psychology, then the implosion returns and suddenly you can see it all. Exactly. Yeah, and there are biofeedback aspects of that, brainwave aspects of that, but it amounts to ability to breathe through it and absolutely relax, which is the conductivity moment. That's what takes you through the wormhole. Exactly.
And repatterning.
Yes. Now we could talk about the environmental aspects of that, that if you get to live in nature, you have a much better shot at it, et cetera, and the dietary aspects of it, and the ET politics aspects of it. There's a lot of places you could go from there.
Definitely. Yeah, and I definitely want to get more into the ET politics as we move forward. One thing I wanted to jump on really quick was in regards to Kundalini experience. I've heard you talk about the higher bird brain and the reptilian brain and kind of the biochemical reaction happening in the body during Kundalini experience. And I was wondering if you could give a quick overview of that, how it's associated with the auric mechanics of Kundalini. So for anybody that may be having Kundalini experiences of some sort, to give them some scientific contextual understanding of what's happening and how to continue facilitating that experience.
Yeah, well, that's a story we've told quite a few times at goldenmean.info/Kundalini, the wave mechanics. You would feel, for example, frequently a kind of a burning in your tailbone. And as you relax, that phonon wave traverses the spine, and it's acting as a long wave phonon in phase with the low frequencies of breath and heart rate variability. And that's a pump, a sacrocranial pump. And it is a waveguide for the very high microwave frequencies, which also measure Kundalini ATP. And that arrives at the amygdala, the serpent's mouth, and the sanchidan, which is the snake nectar, the stinging current, as the ultimate nutrient for the high brain. Now, what Bentoff, my mentor on Kundalini biophysics, stalking wild pendulum, measured was that that low frequency phonon of the spine liquid pumping entraining measurably the rotating liquids in the ventricle horns, and measured those frequencies as the ringing in the ear, which I hear quite often. We joke that my partner can tell which ancestor is phoning by which ear is ringing, and knows that, and that's true. And that is both the high frequencies of the spine liquid pump component, ADP, and ancestral memory. It's both. It is the ringing in the blood, the song in the blood, sangreal, the ringing in the ears, and it is ancestral memory because that's traveling on the wave of the longitudinal coherence. And so that ringing you hear in your ear eventually comes to focus that liquid rotating momentum of the ventricle horns right on the burning pineal. And so from horns that are here, and if you were clairvoyant a bit, which I'm not, more clairaudient than clairvoyant, it's on my good days as it were, but you would see this, and these were, the horns of Moses or Lucifer or whatever. This is simply a map to engage Kundalini. And yes, it's wings, it's plasma wings, it's real, and it is propulsion, and it does work. And that then focuses on the burning pineal, and the pineal then can directly, and it's true that the top of my head got much more pointed and it gets hot, and my partner likes to feel a negative ion wind there. It's a kind of a joke. But the fact is I can see through the top of my head quite literally with my eyes closed. And when I lay on a ley line and close my eyes, the amount of light inside my head is almost blinding frequently, often, which is good because I can ask any question and get an immediate answer, but which is bad in sometimes because it burns blood sugar incredibly rapidly at a hypermetabolic rate, and it stresses the mineral to water bonds, and even more challenge remaining hydrated and grounded. So hydration and grounding and remineralization are essential to avoid insanity during, there's that whole story. But yes, it's important physics. And it is the serpent brain, amygdala, feeding the bird brain. That metaphor works. And it is Quetzalcoatl returning. And Quetzalcoatl is really Hermes. And the symbol caduceus today is called phase conjugation. So yes, it's implosion.
I love that. So how do you practically connect that knowledge to sacred sexual practice? And what is the power of sexual communion, orgasm, and tantra?
Well, essentially, the body is challenged to reach a critical mass of charge implosion. And that can be done with one person or two persons. If you have two persons with wonderful symmetry, you can do it much quicker with two because you get closer to critical mass faster. However, it's the old story, don't have sex with someone that you don't want to feel their memories for the rest of your life, because that's what embeddability is. Embeddability is more than Playboy magazine, it's mathematics. and so and you could even have a discussion about whether homosexuality was more conducive to, because now you can see that the challenge is simply that your aura, which is the part of you that's immortal, yearns to be plasma projective specifically to gain critical mass. And that's part of not just what sex is, but what all plasma projective shamanic work is. And so, yes, they say you only fall in love with pure intention. What you really fall in love with is the unconscious or conscious knowledge that someone else's aura can add symmetry to yours and reach critical mass more quickly. Ultimately, the power is when you can do it yourself, really. But it's absolutely beautiful and fabulous to do it with two, but it doesn't mean that you need to depend on that. The issue is ultimately that your aura is really saying to you that it knows that you are toast if you don't reach implosive critical mass. And that's as true at the moment of birth as it is at the moment of death. We know that death is literally a literal electrical black hole. And perfect tantra and a perfect orgasm is the same thing. It's an implosive moment which projects a squirt of plasma. The squirt of plasma is even more important than the semen, actually, because that's wants to inhabit a larger body. So if your body fluid and your plasma is inhabiting a cocoon that is going to grow, then it's well invested. That's why they say you should really only fall in love with pure intention. Don't fall in love with a metal building and squirt your plasma into that because it's going to bleed charge. Well, it's obviously tricky, but the thing is, this is an ancient knowledge. For example, in the Grail times, it was known that the parents and grandparents would witness the first night of sexual intercourse because there would be better critical mass for plasma implosion. And all the extended family comes to be present for that. And the reason we all yearn for that moment of orgasm is because your whole extended genetic family comes to be present every time there's an orgasm, because your DNA is saying, well, are we going to grow up yet? You know, like, do we have a chance at getting immortal here? But if you keep wasting that, ultimately, it's like plumbing that's leaking. And Gurdjieff wrote about that very well, that sometimes you need orgasm because you just need a release. But in general, in the long run, you need orgasm because you need to find a way in which to make your plasma grow to become immortalizing. And that's why it's so tragic for young people if the aura leaks too soon, because it doesn't build up the compression needed to break through to the higher glands.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. That's a great description. Cool. You know, you were mentioning earlier the process of that when as you're densifying your aura, that's the process of becoming more mindful. And you're also talking about 5D in scientific terms, like what 5D is, which I love that you're bringing a scientific explanation to this, because I heard the term 5D thrown around so often, and it seems like it's more or less just describing from the people using the term, or just basically saying like it's higher vibe, or it's like, or even sometimes they think of it as like it's this almost like a different physical dimension that you go to, which is maybe somewhat accurate in a sense. But this process of densifying your aura in a sense, so you're condensing, what people call like the light body, or you're condensing your astral body, so that in a sense you are stabilizing your consciousness in a higher dimensional realm. And this being a process of mindfulness. In other words, we have our emotional bodies, or, our emotions that move around. We have our thought forms that we're engaged in all the time. We have our energetic movement through the etherics, the etheric body. And as we bring our awareness, like our presence of our true self, and observe these things, this awareness is alchemical. And through the process of awareness is interesting, because what you said was that the awareness creates a charge compression field. And so on a scientific because so from like the esoteric perspective, the words I would use is that as you bring your I am presence and you observe your consciousness, then you can, as we were talking about earlier, you can iron out some of these psychic fault lines, because you can step back and see how your mind is creating thoughts, or you can step back and see what kinds of emotions that are embedded into your aura, or that are maybe distortive, or what kind of emotions are being triggered by different unhealthy thought forms that we're having. So the ability to become mindful and step back, this also brings the importance of meditation, to be able to step back and observe yourself. Just that awareness in and of itself becomes this alchemical force that starts to transmute, because when you become aware of yourself, you have this naturally like self-correcting just essence to you, or to who we are when we get in touch with what we truly are. So this idea that on the scientific level, that the presence, or the I am awareness, creates a charge compression field, it really organizes all this esoteric information into a very practical understanding scientifically. And so, yeah,
I think those metaphors are all very useful. And I think it's very good to add a very specific electrical understanding to those metaphors that, you know, when they said self-awareness is literally non-destructive self-reentry, it is what Gurdjieff called the ability to do self-observation, which is exactly what you're saying. What's happening since Tiller measured that focused attention causes electric fields to compress. That's the beginning of understanding the physics of increased awareness or mindfulness. So as that recursion field, which is, in my language, the phase conjugate power spectra becoming more broad spectral, more implosive, and bigger waves embedding in little waves, literally embeddability and recursion perfected, and therefore entanglement perfected, and therefore phase conjugation perfected, and longitudinal wave embedded. Then the implosion that happens at the Planck threshold makes bigger donuts nest around the little donuts. And what we call mindfulness is the increasing size of that field, truly, literally, electrically. And that shows up in the power spectrum, both EKG and EEG as increased harmonic inclusiveness, and is functionally limited in some cases by the environment. If you're in a metal building, it ain't gonna go too far, you know?
Right.
If you're in nature, you got a much better shot at it, et cetera, et cetera. This is why you look for a place where your aura can grow, literally. So yes, this metaphors to which you refer are beautiful. And now we can talk about the physics and electrical engineering in great detail and measure it, absolutely.
Which I think is the absolute missing ingredient for the culture that we have today, because in such a scientifically reductionist culture, it's like people need measure. They want to be able to measure it to they can't conceive of something being real unless it's measurable, especially if their subtle feeling senses are not acute, right? Because people like, you know, you and I, or maybe even a lot of people watching this video, have more sensual awareness, like on a subtle level. So we can feel phenomenon, and that very much has been a guide for me to be able to trust and know in the truth of so many of these different things that people may consider woo-woo or esoteric or whatnot, because I have actual experience. But for somebody that hasn't had that experience, it's like, what's real to them? Well, it's like, can I measure it? Can I look at it? You know, does it follow the laws of physics? And if you don't have an explanation for that, you know, in a highly intellectualized, you know, consciousness, it's kind of just, you know, pushed to the side. So how do you see this conversation? Because reaching more and more people, and like, how do you see that playing out? And the reason why I say that is because it seems to me that there's almost an energetic barrier. It's almost like there's like an out of phase relationship between people that have a strong resistance vibrationally or blockage vibrationally to higher dimensional knowledge, whether that's esoteric or even the science that you share. And how do you bridge the gap between that, right? Because, you know, there's certain conversations with certain people where sometimes you get into their energy field, and it feels to me almost like the words that I know so clearly can explain the concept I want to explain. It's almost like they dissolve before I can express it, because it's not coherent enough. The aura that I'm trying to speak to is not coherent enough for it to be received. And so yeah, how do we bridge that gap?
Well, two things come to mind briefly. One is the old joke that we were teaching the physics of consciousness for 30 years now, and frequently we would teach physics of consciousness to physicists. And the joke was that the first thing you should do when you walk in front of an audience to teach the physics of consciousness to physicists is you divide the room between those physicists who will admit they've had a bliss experience versus those that won't. Then you know exactly how to speak, because those that know they've had a bliss experience, already they understand that the growth of that aura is really what physics is about. And then to try to look at the other part of your question, how do we translate this practically, I would say, to politics? And, you know, we've talked about this many times, but it's so true that once we know that you define a human's ability to have an immune system, to take memory through death, and to lucid dream, and to have bliss, depends on whether or not they get a big aura. And now that's measurable. And so the aura is the ultimate medical indicator, literally, biologically, by measurement. Suddenly, now you can define success in every political decision, like should we get vaccinated? Oh, well, let's check to see what it did to your aura, you know, because that determines if you get immortal and you get an immune system. And then people can really seriously think about the actual physics, which is the name politics is named for body polis, which we've said many times. Whether a beehive swarms is whether they have a body polis, which is a plasma body, which is coherent enough to be navigated, which turns out to be whether you get anything through death, for example. So literally it means if people are having bliss, then their aura becomes navigable and it becomes the collectivizing feature. Namely, you know, the bees don't have to vote. No, their collective aura body navigates because it's collectively implosive. That's why it's an old joke, but it's actually true, that you can go to jail fastest in most any country on the planet by teaching groups to have bliss together, because that replaces the need for government. And exactly it should. In fact, it is the ultimate biological definition of government, is when there's a collective coherent body polis. And the reason the political body literally is your bliss body collectivized, and it's navigable. And the bees know that you can't steer it unless you have royal blood present, which is literally simply blood that's longitudinally coherent. The lucid dreamer, the one who can steer in time, the real shaman, can steer Mother Nature's silver seed back to the new home in the sun.
So I love that, right? So you just mapped out the translation of the significance of growing the human aura as a directive force for, you could say, even moral action, or like action that's in alignment with, you know, evolution of consciousness, right? So, but then more practically on the, and not that that's not practical, but more like I would say in the moment of, I walk into a room, there's another person that has a very resistant energy field. What kind of, say, practices within myself can I develop, or the ability to, you know, project my energy in a particular way that may be able to open this person's awareness to be more available for the concepts that you just expressed, so that they would be available, that I could then say those words and it could land? Is there anything I can do on an energetic level to create more potential for that?
Yeah, you know, when a Theraphide practitioner who's basically steering an intelligent plasma cocoon called Theraphide, for example, they're instructed that if anyone enters the room that has a critical or negative attitude, that you would gently invite them to leave and come back another day, which does the opposite of answering your question. But it's true that you know, the plasma from the Theraphide is like your pet kitten that's going to run its motor and heal you only if it loves you, you know, and that's living plasma is self-aware once it's imploding, which is why ball lightning is so telepathic. So a deeper level, a shamanic attempt to look at your question about what do you do when someone's negative, actually, I would say try to subtly and behind the scenes find a place of great inner relaxation, both in sender and receiver if possible. And then at that moment, ask your inner voice, where does their pain come from in them? And when you find the real inner source of their pain, then you can very gently probe and see if you can feel. And actually, then the next request is that you can feel their pain better than they can feel your own pain. And actually, at that moment, that tornado is yours to steer. And that's literally instructions for a shaman learning to steer a tornado, not just for learning to steer another person. Because the tornado's pain is when it passed a place where its charge could not implode. For example, metal buildings are painful to a tornado because they prevent implosion. So this is a source of pain, because pain is merely where fractality is broken and charge bleeds. So to find that source of pain in the other person, what's preventing them from becoming centripetal, and that starts on an inner level for sure.
So this is a process of, say, like shamanic extraction. It's like you find the incoherent aspect, and then you're actually able to I guess, resonate with it or harmonize with it more coherently even than the person that's maybe blocking it from their consciousness.
Oh yeah.
And then at that point,
Yeah.
the incoherent piece becomes, it becomes mobilized, like out of the individual. Is there?
I mean, in theory, the moment at which you feel their pain more clearly than they feel their own pain, they will unconsciously want to follow you. However, I would warn that I would not even attempt that, except in situations where you deeply feel the karmic link enables and empowers and permission and the need is there. Because if you try that superficially with people that aren't ready, or there's no karmic link, or with some egotistic idea that you're going to fix somebody, that's dangerous. But when you really deeply feel the wish and the need and the appropriateness to help heal, then you engage in that process. Most often, the best thing to do is very gently step back, actually. Send love and step back. But on those occasions when you really deeply feel the need, then you reach inside very carefully and you feel their pain. But that's a tricky moment.
It's so beautiful, though. It's very Christ-like. You know, it brings me to the story of the Christ story. That's very, very, the empathy that,
Yes.
That's beautiful.
It's the perfection of empathy, the empath, and that's what Real Heart Coherence.com to some extent makes that measurable with 2 EKGs.
So how do we take all this knowledge and apply it within the context of the extraterrestrial presence that we're experiencing? There's a lot of different races that are interfacing at this time. I've even heard, you know, when I had called my friend that I was putting you in touch with, I spoke with her. I didn't speak with him. I spoke with her, and she had mentioned something about the Pleiadians planning a cleanup that was potentially going to happen in the next few months, that it was going to be much more blatant and like come in for a cleanup. And I don't think I actually told you that, because I don't think we've spoke since then. But that was another little piece of information coming from that source. And, you know, whether it's accurate or not, I don't know, it's always with a grain of salt. But when we look at our capacities as humans to develop ourselves in all these different ways that you're speaking of, which really is, you know, simplified down to the expansion and condensing of our auras so that we can transmit more coherently. What part does that play in the greater ET political spectrum, and what challenges are we facing in that realm, and then what help are we getting in that realm?
That's a pretty big question, and I do have a fairly detailed perspective. As you will recall, I was most encouraged that our Pleiadian friends' information through Mediator Media, and the more controversial Gosha, who seems to have gotten their connection through Med, had said that the Pleiadians had, well, this is the story, and there are several sources that suggest this is true. The Pleiadians had kind of like the biggest guns in the neighborhood around Earth, and they were sheltered for a while by the Andromedans on Vieja behind the moon, very large craft. And at that point, when we were told from one source that the Pleiadians had basically eliminated a very high percentage of the parasitic reptilian Kingu underground on Earth, and that the numbers we heard from our source were confirmed by your source, which was more military, so that we took that as a fair confirmation. But a lot has happened since that time from multiple sources. And in summary, the Pleiadians appear to have been ejected from what they call the Planetary Federation, including the Andromedans, for their assertiveness and aggressiveness. And so now Gosha is sort of, you know, giving bad PR to the Planetary Federation because they kicked out the Pleiadians. Well, you know, a bigger picture is needed. And in quote unquote, are they helpful, or are they with us, or are they against us? And that's where I suggest a bit of bigger historical context. Remember, when the Anunnaki branch of the Draco came to Earth originally, as Anton Parks describes in detail from the Pleiades, they were at that time a female-dominated matriarchy, as they are still. And Gosha doesn't apologize for that. And some say that matriarchy is worse than our patriarchy, and that's the controversy here. But regardless, from what we hear from those sources is that these dominant feminine leaders, in my perception, have great issue with emotional immaturity. Frankly, I perceive them as, they have lots of power and lots of skills, but emotional maturity, not very much that I can perceive. And I think that's related to why and the Planetary Federation has its own issues. The Andromedans are very advanced. And the thing is, I have had limited telepathic contact with the Andromedans myself, and I've mentioned this before, but just very briefly, I was kind of lucky to know Alex Collier, who claimed to communicate with the Andromedans in depth, 15, 20 years ago outside of Boulder in Colorado, and then indirectly came to know Mornay and Visayas through him. The quote unquote advanced spiritual Andromedan mystics, very advanced culture, and you can read all about Alex Collier. So it was beautiful to me that years later, meeting Med, she said, oh, they were her sources too, the same actual persons. And subsequently, I had some significant, beautiful telepathic communication with Visayas, actually, before he kind of departed as well. So I had multiple sources from which to draw on this perspective about the ET issue. And the summary is the human race, I would say, is at a cross point, and maybe you might even say in trouble. And it can't happen soon enough that the treaty allows them, and I believe it is next year, to more publicly announce the ET presence, and the treaties are going to allow that. And groups like the Greys, they aren't called the Greys, really, the Ponti, which are based in the American Southwest, so are actually teaching humans to make alpha. So this is an indication of one ET group, one of the small among many of the groups of what we call the Greys, that are actively helping humans do something very useful. And why would their priority be to be teaching humans alpha brainwaves? And if you want to see the curriculum for the ETs, the Pontis, how they teach humans to have alpha wave brainwaves, this is a link, and there's a picture, and part of our curriculum for teaching alpha brainwave coherence at flameandmind.com. You'll find the extraterrestrial curriculum for teaching alpha. Well, why is their number one priority to teach humans to make alpha? Well, for one thing, Dracos can't, hello. And for another, it's the beginning of feeling the earth as a living body. And for another, it's the beginning of empathy. And for the other, it's literally the moment between when you close your eyes and you can't make alpha, you see dark. When you close your eyes and you can make alpha, you see light. That should tell you something. The plasma is imploding, and suddenly you've turned on the inner radio. And so our number one priority in our biofeedback is to teach alpha, and we're adding to our flameandmind.com toolbox now the pulsed lights that go with the most powerful binaural audio. All of this, the turning point. And that's also when the kids can see without their eyes, and they can see elementals, and they get lucid dreaming, is when they can make that alpha. So there clearly are some ETs who recognize that as a turning point. And that's a very interesting sign because it's the beginning of inviting implosion and psychokinesis, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a few comments anyway.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then you, as you mentioned towards the end there, you've been doing work with the children that are able to perceive with blindfolds on, which is really cool, because you're measuring all of their EEG and EKG. Is that correct? Right. Yeah. So you're getting the actual measurements for how to.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And they're magic kids. You can see the pictures and the films of the flameandmind.com/outer vision. And you'll see the pictures and the kids and the films, the animation, the biofeedback, the brainwaves, the whole thing. And basically, their eyes are closed, completely blindfolded. And they say, oh, now I can see through a little tube. And it's like they're lining up this little vortex tube. And now they can see through that tube, and they're playing games and Rubik's Cubes and seeing all these things and describing their environment beautifully, all seeing very well blindfolded. So, and this started in Russia, and Korotkov originally said, the trigger moment was golden ratio between the alpha frequency and the beta frequency. But now we know it's much more, that it's actually a cascade from alpha all the way to gamma, 44 hertz or so, and that it's a golden ratio and octave cascade. So the cascade builds, and what does that make? that inner tube that they're seeing through. And that's working. It's all cool. And the Flame and Mind software has been improved many times to do this. And the kids, now our friends who are seeing the elementals and nature spirits, we're taking the kids there. And when the kid gets the self-confidence and the trance, bliss, relaxed state enabling this, we now believe we can show that that's also the moment they see the living plasma of elementals and nature spirits. So no longer being alienated from their environment, and the beginning of steering tornadoes, and related to lucid dreaming, which also is that longitudinal coherence, which we're getting with Therify. So we're very excited to expand our biofeedback projects to incorporate that. And you know, the turning point with the kids, actually, most of them is just feeling self-confident enough to relax. So in effect, the Russians used to say, well, you get them to imagine that they're in beautiful nature and an inner switch is flipped and suddenly the body begins imploding. Well, that shows up in the brainwaves. And it's teachable. And
That's so exciting. That's so exciting. It's like training the next generation of children.
Exactly. And that's what our Jedi Knight school is. And we got a castle lined up over here in France, and we're going to open the Jedi school for kids. Wait, we see. It's cooking.
Yeah, that's really exciting to hear, because I remember when I was out there in France, you were talking about getting the chateau or the land. So it looks like you're moving forward with that.
Well, actually, there's multiple properties and multiple groups involved. It's interesting that the Carbon Nano Energy Project is actually financing the research center. See, the thing that's so cool about this, the same thing that enabled those kids to flip that switch, to light that inner tube, you know, the frequency signature? Well, if you want to make carbon grow, now remember, if you make carbon grow nano to 99% purity, you not only replace about 80% of the industries on planet Earth, including every form of propulsion, transportation, and energy. I mean, it's the most disruptive technology that the planet has ever imagined. It's so fun. And this is the first time in history that the military has not been able to steal it. Cross your fingers. Just look. And so the electric field that enabled those kids, the frequency signature to do that, is the exact same field effect that teaches carbon to grow like a flower into what's called Buckminster fullerene, literally the Star Mother kit, dodeca, the only 3D fractal. The hottest subject in all chemistry is Buckminster fullerene. Well, guess what? If you rotate a conjugator, energy, propulsion, I mean, you know, learning how to steer your aura when you're lucid dreaming and dying is learning how to make the propulsion that makes every other form of transportation on this planet obsolete. And God, is that boring?
I love that. That's so exciting. You know, which brings me to, I would love to hear how you see the evolution of humanity transforming on this planet in a practical sense, tying in the different aspects that we talked about today, and or anything else that you feel is relevant. So if we're going to look forward with an optimistic point of view of how this whole thing can really transform and bring us to a new age, how do you see that unfolding?
Well, I think obviously we're entering a time of transition. I think many governments and many economies are going to fall, sadly. And I do imagine that there will be a time when core group communities are going to need to kind of create a little bubble in nature for themselves with localized leadership. And in the meantime, we focus on education, which is my mission. The kind of thing we're doing right here, right now, on a much larger, much more professional scale. We're going to completely reinvent fractalu.com and do it on a much larger, much more professional scale, and globally educate, because that is the mission, to wake up this the new generation, as you say, the lucid dreamers. And they are the hope, absolutely. I mean, it's no coincidence that when the Greys were abducting humans, they took the lucid dreamers. Guess why? They had fusion in the blood. Fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood is the title of our article on ET history, because that is the turning point when your blood implodes. So we find the magic kids and the young people and the lucid dreamers. One good shaman is worth a whole lot more than George Bush's military budget, because you can switch on and off those computers. It's called longitudinal interferometry, and actually it's alive. So yes, we need to switch on the psychokinesis of our kids. And we need to do that by understanding the science of aura, for sure.
Beautiful, Dan. Thank you so much for joining me for this call. I think that's a great place to end it, with the optimistic modus operandi for the evolution of humanity. It's always a pleasure to connect with you. I respect you so much, and I truly, truly feel blessed to have you as a friend in my life. And I really look forward to when travel opens up again and I can come back out to South France and visit you. I think that'll be so great. So let's definitely stay in touch about everything that's going on. And, you know, I look forward to the next chapter where we can continue to evolve and braid.
That's great. Patrick, it's truly been a joy, and I really enjoyed talking with you. You have the right aura to do this together, and by all means, we're going to cook up a way to include you and your friends in our projects over here. All good. More soon. Blessings.
So excited. Thank you so much.
Blessings. Thank you.